Yes, hi everyone. So today we're going to, together with Michael, we're going to talk about hybrid um, teaching in a hybrid classroom at TU Delft. And we're going to talk about the practices so far, the challenges, and we're going to also at some point give you tips and tricks of, how to run a hybrid class in a more efficient way.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe just to introduce myself, so I'm a blended learning developer or blended learning advisor with the EEMCS or AV faculty. I suppose I don't know if you wanted to say who you were
Yes,
as well.
and I am I am the Michael at architecture.
Yes, yeah, just for those of you who don't know. So yes, we really wanted to keep today's session quite informal and quite based on people's experiences. Obviously, as Naomi was saying, yeah, make sure to maybe kind of not mention too many of the specifics, but maybe just the broad issues that you're coming up against. And yeah, we'd really like to talk about that. I think particularly with hybrid, I think a lot of people have tried it out. Yeah, so we'd really be interested to hear your experiences and see how we can help. So we're not going to keep it very formal, but just to kind of give you a broad overview of kind of what we hope to cover. So we're going to start with a bit of a definition of what we're talking about when we mean hybrid. I was just having a conversation just before we started the session that sometimes we kind of interchange the terms hybrid and blended, and there's HyFlex I've heard, and also fusion is another term that's come along as well. We don't want to kind of restrict the discussion necessarily just to kind of our definition, but we just wanted to maybe start with some definitions and see what you think, and see maybe if you think things should be broadened as well. We're going to maybe move on to talking about some potential benefits and challenges, but then really want to hear about your own personal experiences, about your benefits that you found teaching hybrid, and also your the challenges you've come up against as well. And as I say, it's just going to be all around discussion. So yeah, do feel free to put your hand up at any time to add things to the chat. We really want to just hear what your the issues that you're facing and some of the things that you've come up against. And then if we have time at the end, we have a Miro board here, which we're going to, or we may move on to looking at some scenarios and maybe some things you might want to consider in different kinds of sort of general teaching scenarios as well. So Atve and I are going to kind of take turns in speaking. So yeah, it's not going to be me the whole time. So yeah, so I'll maybe when I pause, Atve, you can feel free to jump in with any points. This was the first definition that we drew out from the Teaching Academy Education Conversation. It's quite a while ago now. But by hybrid, in this sense, we're talking about education that's provided simultaneously to students who are on site and to students who are at a distance and participate online. So essentially by that we mean like a synchronous, a live session, lecture, tutorial, seminar, whatever you want to call it, but where students are attending both online and there are students in the classroom at the same time. So that was that definition. Atve, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, so are we going to the next slide, Michael?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, yeah. So basically, hybrid would be just when you have, what we refer to as hybrid would be when you have face-to-face and online teaching at the same time. And you give the possibility to the students who are attending online to, listen and also interact. So it's different from live streaming because you also provide the possibility to the online attendants to interact and participate in the discussions going on in the class on campus.
Yeah, absolutely. And from this paper we've drawn out as well, the kind of so these are some of the benefits that they've highlighted. It centers around flexibility and accessibility. So it's that kind of focus on the flexibility broadly for the student, although I have heard of instances where hybrid involves there's maybe two lecturers and one is online, one is in the classroom, so it isn't necessarily just for students. So yeah, centered around flexibility, also accessibility as well. So there may be reasons, it's not just kind of necessarily flexibility by what you fancy. There may be some really valid reasons why that flexibility is really important for some people, and so that's why we wanted to kind of center on that accessibility side of things as well.
Yeah. Yep, sorry. Yeah, so even during the non-pandemic, times, flexibility would be still part of it, right? There might be other reasons than the pandemic that the students can't attend, the sessions in person. So you give them a chance to participate, online. Also, in terms of accessibility, you give the chance to the students who are attending online as well or in person to participate and interact like the other students.
Yeah, absolutely. And the second part of that definition as well. Now, again, this is not necessarily my definition, but it's just from this paper. It aims to provide an almost equivalent learning experience for those who participate on site and online. Again, I'd be really interested to hear if that is happening, or if that is something we should necessarily aim for. But that is kind of the broad idea behind that definition. Yes, Calvin. Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, that almost equivalent learning experience becomes kind of a bit of a sticking point sometimes in terms of from the teaching perspective.
Yeah.
And it's a bit nuanced in terms of looking at it. Is it really the student's choice? Right. So like I sort of look at the really lazy hybrid, which doesn't quite fit this, back when we were doing Collegeorama, where a lecture is recorded and a student could follow it online if they choose to. But a danger comes, which we sort of see now, when hybrid is necessary because of the lack of space. Then this is where, from a teacher's perspective, we have to spend a lot of time ensuring that the learning experience is equivalent. And so that point is quite a, and that's why we were earlier talking about different definitions of hybrid. There is sort of a class of, if there isn't enough spots and a certain percentage of the students have to take it online, they have to be equivalent. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But if it's sort of a service, an optional thing to give students flexibility, then if they're making that choice, you have a little bit more room to forego some of the interactivity or other aspects.
Very valid point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for those who've maybe tried it, it can be very difficult to provide what we might term an equivalent learning experience. Again, we perhaps need to define what we mean by equivalent, because obviously it's not going to be exactly the same. So we maybe need to think about, what are we trying to achieve? What is the baseline of what we're hoping to offer students and to provide that teaching experience and learning experience. But also there's another kind of point as well, which is maybe dipping into something later we could get into if we have time, and that is the interaction between the students participating on site and those online. And I think that's, again, something that's very difficult. There's actually a paper I could share later on, which actually looks at that term. The term they use is actually student relatedness, but broadly it means, the ability for students who are participating online to feel that they're part of something, to be able to interact with the students who are in the room as well. Something difficult to achieve, but something also we have to bear in mind, when we're planning and thinking about setting up a hybrid classroom. I suppose anything you want to add on that as well, or
yeah, but the question came to my mind, like whether we also call live streaming, let's say what we have as Collegeorama at TU Delft, like do we call that hybrid?
That's a very good question. Maybe I could throw that out to the room to see if do people consider that hybrid when there's kind of more of a live stream, so it's a less of an interactive, where it's more of a either the teacher kind of live streaming a lecture where students can perhaps participate through text or questions. Do we consider that hybrid? Does that kind of
it's a form of hybrid if you're having to focus on at the same time. From a teacher's perspective, that's how I look at it. If there are two separate groups of students that you're having to divide your attention to, from a teaching perspective, that's hybrid. And then there's different levels of hybrid and equivalency, but yeah, if I have to somehow monitor a chat or have TAs that are bringing things in, I wouldn't say it's a very effective form of hybrid teaching, but.
Thanks, Bob.
Well, I just wanted to point out that in practice, that is what that is being called by lots of people. So the bare bones live stream, even without the chat, or with the chat with 20 seconds delay, is being called and thought about as a hybrid session.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so I think that is what we are considering as hybrid. I think it came up just as I was chatting before the session, that perhaps when we say hybrid, and there are lots of different definitions, you go to different institutions, some might call it high flex. My previous institution called it kind of high flex, perhaps to focus on that flexibility. Again, I've heard sort of fusion. Don't want to necessarily get caught up on the definitions too much, but I think it's really interesting to kind of maybe dig into it and think about what we consider as important, I guess. So yeah, obviously we kind of thought about that flexibility, accessibility, the ability to for students on site and online to be able to relate to each other as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because I mean, you need to know what you're going to achieve by going hybrid. So if there's not going to be interaction, or if interaction is not going to be important in the lecture you're giving, then Collegiorama would be a good way to go hybrid that way, to live stream only, because that doesn't give the possibility to the students to participate, or even it doesn't even let the teachers know how many participants are actually attending online.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we will move on to the next slide, I promise. But actually, maybe I could throw out one more question just to the room and to say, you know, what do you consider important in your own teaching, or just generally, if we had to kind of adopt some kind of hybrid format, what would people consider as kind of maybe the most important thing, or maybe the top 2 or 3 most important things? John Allen. Sorry.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to try and achieve the same kind of engagement with the lecture material, the learning activities that you achieve in the on-campus students. Maybe you have to do that in a different way for the online students, but they should have the same level of engagement. And I think it's most models hybrid I've seen and done myself so far. Probably the online students are more passive than the on-campus students.
Mm-hmm. So inclusion is something that we have to bear in mind.
Yeah, well, not so much inclusion, but activation.
Yeah, but including also the students who are online. Usually the TA, so after having, you know, hybrid sessions at different faculties, we came to the conclusion that there must be a TA coordinating, you know, the chats, and, you know, to make sure that the people who are online are included, and also, you know, participating enough as they want. We also have a comment in the chat. Yes, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, maybe to broaden this discussion even further, it's interesting you're talking about kind of the activation and the kind of activation of the learning materials, or, you know, dealing with those learning materials. So perhaps the conversation really is broader, beyond just, for example, focusing on the live session itself, but thinking about those things that are going on outside of the hybrid session, be it online or online or in the classroom or whatever it might be. And that's where we kind of get into blended, and where the terms start to get confusing. Yeah, I mean, do we consider the whole course to be hybrid? So it might be a mix of different activities which are online and on site. Is that simultaneous? Is it perhaps not simultaneous? Yeah, so we can get into a broader discussion there. But I think it's really important to focus, as you say, on the learning materials rather than just, you know, that specific session. What is the actual value of that session in the first place in the context of the course? I think perhaps. Yeah,
we have some comments here from Calvin. So truly real-time equivalent communication or question asking options. Yeah, that's very important. That's how the TAs could actually help with, you know, also raising those questions. If there's a chat, then, you know, if they're moderating the chat, and from some form of avatar or representation of online participants. Yeah, what I found useful and quite interesting also for the like on-campus audience during a hybrid session was, you know, having on one of the screens, you know, online attendance, so that they could also be seen by the people in class. To be able to ask questions rather than writing them only in the chat. If they're given the chance to just speak up, that's also very good. Yes, Michael, sorry, did I interrupt you?
Oh, no, Calvin, I think you had a point.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, you know, I teach a lot of large classes, so I'm always doing the live stream thing. So it's easy to forget all those students. And I almost feel like there should be some sort of way in these digital tools where you're following it to kind of have those buttons that you see in airport washrooms about how was your, just sort of they can provide some sort of input about their understanding level. And like you could physically have a monitor or something with some sort of emoji that kind of captures the collective sort of mood or level of understanding, because I find that's the hardest. If I'm in a classroom, I can read the room a little bit, but when everyone's online, you kind of go a little bit insane because you're explaining things that you know.
Yes.
So everything seems clear to you, and it's very without, you know, it was same thing when I made my first online teaching videos. It was a complete disaster because teaching to yourself in a room with no feedback just results in all kinds of craziness.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. I think we're probably a lot of us used to kind of speaking to a screen, almost kind of speaking to the ether, and that sense of kind of just not getting anything back, and just the delay as well causing sort of problems as well. Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting thing. And also when it's, I don't know if other people, when the session is recorded, as to whether it's not recorded can make a difference. I'm deviating a little bit, but I actually sort of most of my time I'm a musician, and I know that like if I'm being recorded versus not being recorded, it's a completely different experience. And if there's an audience there, if not, you know, obviously it's a completely different sort of setup really. But I would be interested to hear if others kind of experience that same the same issue when you're being recorded versus not. But maybe that's kind of another conversation. Yeah, so just picking up on Bob's point as well. So some form of regulating the attention, focus online, preventing distraction by chats. Yeah, absolutely. So this is again one point which we were going to maybe talk about afterwards. So kind of setting up. So if you have a teaching assistant, or maybe even more than one teaching assistant, that can be one really helpful thing. To try and take that focus, to try and take the distraction away and allow you to focus on the actual teaching itself, by perhaps delegating the collection of questions. So it could be, you know, collecting questions in the chat or comments, or even dealing with technical issues via the chat, and then kind of feeding that to the teacher, who can then focus and not have to, you know, look at lots of different windows or chats at the same time. Bob, would you like to follow on from that?
I actually didn't mean the teacher's distraction. I actually meant students getting distracted,
Oh, of course.
and especially engaged, smart, proactive students who can get sidetracked when there's not just one thing going on, like in a physical room with a clear center, and perhaps your neighbor to sort of say something too silently. But if there's two chat threads going on, that can be a distraction for the students, and it's invisible for me then to see whether they have their attention directed at the central story, which you can do very easily in a room, because you can just look at whether they're looking at you or not.
Do you find it helpful if the students online have their cameras on and then they're attending and you can see them and on one of the screens?
Well, I haven't taught hybrid, and also when I teach, I've taught large-scale lectures this quarter via a live stream. So I see people in the chat and people in multiple choice quizzes. So there I can see when they answer quickly 200-300 people, I know they're there. But the smaller sessions I've done in Teams and Zoom, I find that because I don't know where the screen is in relation to their camera, I don't know what they're looking at, because I'm getting used to talking to the camera, but students don't look into the camera. They look at my presentation or somewhere else, but I don't know where they're looking. So for me, no.
I think there's a size thing there as well, because even if you had a big class and you see the class, they're self-regulating because they see each other. And I think the weird thing of if you are seeing their camera views, they're not sitting next to each other. They're not aware of their actions, how they affect others in the same way. So at a certain number, it becomes very distracting, because actually what the faces are doing and it's not, you know, traditional behavior as if you were sitting in the classroom. So at some point, it actually gets very distracting.
For the teacher.
Yeah. You know, you'll see like, and it's like a little thing, like a cat will jump up on their desk and they're interacting with their cat, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. They can probably still focus on the lecture and it's okay and it's just part of their environment, but it's a new thing that just completely, you know, it sounds bad. It's kind of like we're distracted by a kitten, but it does happen. You start teaching and oh, look at the kitty.
No, definitely. I think that's, yeah, it's a really interesting point. So actually, I keep thinking of the kind of distraction of the student, and maybe like I just switch my own notifications off so I'm not distracted by lots of things coming in on my own computer. But yeah, the distraction of the teacher and the whole kind of camera debate as well, possibly a controversial one, but I guess there may be valid reasons why some students would not want to switch their camera on. Maybe they don't have a private study space, maybe they don't, you know, want to reveal things in the background, so on and so forth. So I guess we have to bear that in mind as well. But I'm kind of like turning the whole conversation on its head as well. Thinking way back when I sat in a lecture theatre last, and maybe at the back of the lecture theatre where you can see all the laptops and the screens and YouTube and Facebook and so on and so forth. So this is not just kind of, you know, something unique to online. But maybe we need to think back to the kind of, you know, what is the most important thing. But then, yeah, absolutely removing the distraction for the teacher as well is really important. Are there any other comments on that, or should we move on to the next?
Yeah, we could move to the next one. I think we've already covered this as well.
Yeah, I think we have. Yeah, so again, this is just something from another introduction to hybrid teaching from Learning Technologies. So essentially, yes, just combining face-to-face and online teaching into one cohesive experience. So something which is kind of works together, is not kind of separate. This actually definition kind of draws upon something we touched upon, where half of the class sessions are on campus and half have students working online. My reading of that is perhaps that there are some sessions which are fully on campus, some sessions which are fully online, perhaps. But so that could be another way to consider hybrid as well. So I'm going to dip into this question. We've kind of already maybe touched on a lot of these things, so we can, you know, we don't have to spend long on this, but maybe if you're able to post into the chat or maybe put your hand up and just briefly try and answer the question, why would we use hybrid? Why might we use hybrid?
Now imagine after the pandemic, now, you know, restrictions are loosened. So why would we use it in the future? Classroom capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. So this can go beyond, yeah, the kind of the reasons for room sizes or you know, the pandemic or restrictions and so on. Yeah,
large audience.
So yeah, so obviously the classroom capacity limits could also be an issue for post-COVID. I guess particularly if you had a very, very large course. So mixing online non.
Sorry.
Yeah, maybe I.
Go ahead, Alan.
Yeah. So for example, the course I've just taught in the first quarter is a master course, but it's also offered as an online education option. So you know, for professional education, and in principle they do the course fully online. But now that the lectures were hybrid because you had to live stream, then we said, well, feel free to also join in the hybrid lecture and follow that along with the master students. So there wasn't that much interaction between the master students and online students, but because online students bring their professional backgrounds and their professional experiences, if you can get some kind of interaction going with on-campus students, I think it could be very, very valuable.
Sure. And I see from the comments, yeah, so what all the comments, like if I want to reach a conclusion from reading all these comments, it would be that, you know, hybrid gives us more opportunities and possibilities, right? So collaborations with other universities and institutions, you can easily do that. Let's say invite lecturers from other universities abroad. Like previously would have, you know, costed a lot. It would have needed much more planning than it would, you know, with a hybrid setting set up. And then live events, yeah, exactly. What's happening at architecture is that we're giving possibilities and opportunities to the families to attend the graduation ceremonies of their children and grandchildren and friends and relatives to attend. Yeah. Students who are easily distracted, for example, like this option. So this comes exactly accessibility. It's accessible to those people with learning, for example, difficulties. Anything else you would like to mention?
Yeah, but maybe just to pick up on, well, a couple of the points there. So mixing online on-campus students and that collaboration with other universities and institutions. Really interesting one, yeah, because the possibilities when you open something up could be really interesting. I mean, my own experience actually as an online master's student. I mean, probably the reason I took it was to do with the flexibility, but actually one of the really valuable kind of things which I found from doing the program was actually meeting people from all different kind of areas of the world, from different experiences, doing different kinds of jobs. In a way that perhaps I didn't even expect, and I think that's been a really valuable experience in a way that, you know, if it was a fully on-campus master's degree, I don't think it would necessarily have been the case. Yeah, so that was really valuable, and yeah, in collaborations with other universities and institutions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Certainly, way back when I lived up in or over in Scotland. I know in the Highlands, which is, you know, a very sparse area, they were kind of looking at ways that they could actually collaborate, because travel between those different universities is very difficult. So having that kind of that flexibility, the option to do a hybrid setting, again, could be really valuable for them as well.
Right.
The one thing that I see with hybrid is I actually see it as possibly transforming how we do on-campus education, which is a little bit ironic because you sort of think about it's remote. And I see it as, you know, we get larger and larger classrooms where it's hard to interact. And I actually see perhaps a future where there's more smaller self-study spaces, and then groups of students and friends in groups of 5 or 6 can sit together, follow a lecture live, but also discuss with each other without creating, because you can't discuss in a classroom of 500 students. It's just, and I would like to see that direction, but it actually requires a lot of changes in terms of how the university sets up spaces, right? Because you need a lot more self-study spaces and small study spaces and the technology to facilitate it. But
that's a really interesting point. So yeah, it kind of comes into kind of how we design our education spaces for the future. Yeah, and kind of again focusing really on kind of what is the value of that session, and rather that we need to get everyone in the same room, but yeah, can we design it differently so that we can make the most of those different kind of modes, those different experiences. Yeah, really fascinating. Are there any more points you wanted to pick up on, Atefeh, or anything anyone wanted to mention? Okay. So this is another question. I think it sounds like many people have had an experience of hybrid teaching, so maybe we can skip this one. But perhaps, is there anyone who hasn't experienced it, who maybe would want to experience it for the first time, is kind of wondering kind of what the first questions they'd want to ask are, or maybe wanted to prepare it? Be interested to hear from anyone who's not done it before. But maybe we can skip that one, because I think lots of you have had experience.
Yeah.
So maybe we can dip into more of the practical questions. So yeah, how did you find your experience of hybrid teaching?
Was it a disaster? Was it a success?
Yes. Be honest. Obviously, yeah. Remembering Naomi's comment that this is recorded, so maybe not to make the specifics. John.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it went okay. It's a bit hard to judge. Didn't really receive comments either way from the students. So we had 2 teachers. So one kept an eye on the chat and could relay questions. The other just lectured as normal to the 50-odd people in the room, or 40-odd. But the main thing I noticed is you have far less interaction with the online students. So because there was a chat delay, because you had to use the live stream, Teams live stream thing. So it's fine for asking questions because they can put the questions in chat whenever they feel like it, and then you have your regular "are there any questions" point, and then you look at the person who's monitoring the chat, and they can relay the questions. But the more spontaneous interaction, sometimes you ask like, "Oh, does anybody in the class have an idea about this?" or things like that. Yeah, you can't really do that with online students because of the delay, and I missed that. So whether we activated them to the same extent, hard to tell.
What delay are you referring to, Jan Allen?
So when you have the live stream set up, or use the live stream in Teams, there is a several second delay between what you are saying and what the students see. Mm-hmm. So yeah, if you ask a question, it is 10 seconds before the students hear that you've asked the question, and then they have to start thinking about the answer. And I think the delays have gotten shorter, but it can go up to, I think, as much as 30 seconds in some cases. So you don't have a synchronous communication with the online students, basically.
Okay, with the live stream Teams, through Teams. Yeah, thanks. And Calvin?
Yeah, I had an interesting experience with hybrid because, again, I was teaching a large class, and because of the limitations of number of students in the room, the majority of students were online. We had a blended learning type of course setup, so they had to do lecture prep, and then we would do an hour of lecturing, and then they actually had time to work on the homework and ask additional questions. So what I actually ended up doing to not favor the 75 students that were in the lecture room is I still live streamed from my office and put the live stream up in the lecture room. And then after the first hour, then go to the lecture room to answer questions directly with students that were there, but also interact with the chat. Because my thinking was, when I'm lecturing anyways, the 75 are quiet, and in this way, I'm not forgetting about the students online. It worked okay. The only problem is that we had to have people policing the lecture room, because you get 75 students in a lecture room and there's no professor in there. Very quickly, they're socializing and visiting and not paying attention. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just
Mm-hmm.
sorry, go
yeah,
on.
go ahead.
As for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just to say, yeah, posting. So there are different options for Teams. There's meetings, webinars, live events. I'm posting some details about those kind of things if you hadn't come across them before, because there are different things to consider. The live events being the slight time delay, and also in live events, perhaps one of the advantages of the Teams live events is actually you can have the Q&A panel where students can ask a question. You can actually ask someone to moderate that, so either the questions would appear straight away to the lecturer, and they can be voted on by students, or you can actually set up like an approval process if you wanted to kind of maybe vet them first. So there's lots of options there in kind of grouping Q&As rather than just having a long chat, which kind of can be unwieldy if there's lots of students. But I'm seeing lots of comments about alternatives. So yes, Big Blue Button. Yeah, so I'd be really interested to hear a bit more about that. So I know that it's based on the open source Jitsi technology, but yeah, built on that, I think you can do things like breakout rooms, and I know TPM use it as well. Bob, did you want to say any more about Big Blue Button?
No, not really. This is a nice example of things getting sidetracked because there's side discussions going on in the chat. When someone talked about the delays, someone asked, would UCU, so the virtual classroom in Brightspace, be better? And so I just pointed out that there's also a Big Blue Button running at the TU, which is basically the same as UCU, but better. It's the more advanced original version with a higher capacity. So that's actually not about the discussion we were having. But I did.
Go on, Bob.
Well, I did want to briefly respond to what Calvin said. Like, I also chose to not be in the room. I just did an online session with, and the 70 people who were scheduled to be on campus were in the lecture hall watching me on the big screen, and it seemed to work okay. And actually, for me, it was so nice to have a more direct line to all of those students for open questions. So, for instance, when I have a question like, does anyone have an example of X? When I'm in the auditorium with 300 or 400 people, perhaps 2 or 3 brave hands go up. But when I ask that question online, I get lots and lots of intelligent responses by people who can just type it and they don't have to say it in front of a group of 300 people. So next quarter, a similar course is scheduled in the Aula Auditorium again. And I'm actually not looking forward to having to do it physically again, those lectures. And I'm thinking about making it hybrid in the sense that I'm just going to do it there normally, but have my own chat and poll system as the interaction there. So ask my students in the room there to have like their mobile phone or their laptop to type out responses to open questions that I can then put on the screen to make it more accessible and perhaps less scary to say something in a big session.
Yeah, absolutely. And is that so something you've developed yourself? I think I maybe have seen this before. Is that
Yeah, I built a very simple website where I just put a YouTube live stream embedded with a few ABC buttons and a one-way chat beneath it. So it's all in one screen and there's a minimum distraction.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I think I've seen it. It looks really, really fantastic. I mean, maybe just to mention, if you didn't have obviously your own tooling, there is some things that the TU offer. So we've got the Feedback Fruits interactive presentation. So I've just posted a link to that. Yeah, so there's plenty of different kind of things we can do. I know also actually, not that I'm kind of wedded to Teams or Microsoft anyway necessarily, but there is a feature coming into Microsoft Forms, because I don't know if you're aware that you can do polls in Teams meetings. So you can actually use the 3 dots down the bottom near the chat. And if it's just a standard Teams meeting, you can actually launch a poll where you can ask questions. But I know they're improving that, so they're adding like word clouds and things to it, which I think should be coming soon, if it hasn't already. So yes, absolutely. Thanks, Calvin, for posting the official list of tooling, yeah, and recommendations.
The interesting thing with that, because Bob, you're talking about the big blue button, but as far as I know, we're still supposed to not use that.
Yeah, but that's legalistic bullshit, in my opinion.
See, this actually becomes a problem as a teacher, is like when you're trying to fit within all of the things and you're forcing yourself to use tools that are approved that are really not working. It actually gets quite frustrating because sometimes I see tools and people using things and it's just like, that looks like it's so much better.
Yeah, you can't be as creative as you want, right?
So
yeah, I could completely understand that, and maybe one thing you could actually do. So our role is like blended learning advisors in the faculty. You can get in touch with your blended learning advisor in the faculty if there's a tool that you particularly want to use, or maybe want to get a data agreement for, and become an approved tool that's maintained, or perhaps, we have kind of, a login SSO single sign-on for. If there is something you really are interested in, I know there's certainly a lot in our faculty, then get in touch with your blended learning advisor, or alternatively email educational tooling. I'll try to dig out all the contact details and post those into the chat at the end as well. That's definitely worthwhile.
Yeah. And I think it's always a good idea to consult with your colleagues, ask what else they use, and know about other alternatives that might be GDPR proof compliant.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've posted the educational tooling email address, but also, yeah, do get in touch with your blended learning advisor, because yeah, it's great for us to know kind of what things people are interested in using, so that we can investigate and maybe try and see what we can do. Let's move on to the next question. So we've probably covered a lot of this in the.
I guess so. Yeah, maybe we can move on.
Should we move on? Have we covered kind of many of the challenges? I think we kind of have to a degree, but I know in terms of kind of the technical setup and thing, is that kind of a big barrier for many people? In terms of kind of the audio issues or the setup of videos, or maybe if, for example, you had kind of to facilitate student presentations or different kinds of sessions, has anyone come up against any specific challenges which they haven't managed to get resolved? And maybe to mention on that there is support available, but be really interested to hear about any challenges which are ongoing and are particularly still affecting you. Maybe give you a few moments to think about that, and perhaps we can come back to it if you can't think for the time being.
Yeah, we have one in the chat: how to make the students at home feel included. Yeah, that was also raised by one of the teachers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, there's a paper on this which we could post about different kind of findings and different kind of experiments. But ultimately, I think it possibly comes down to, I guess, speaking to your students and trying to get feedback from them in some kind of way, but also kind of planning the session as well. Because obviously, as a teacher, I imagine it can be quite difficult to understand the experience of those who are maybe attending online. I know it was certainly interesting on a course that I was working on where there was two teachers, and one was attending online, one was actually attending in person, and they actually experienced it firsthand. And maybe, well, like, oh, the audio was just not right, or maybe the camera needs to be in a different place, or or there's kind of no easy way to interact. But I think certainly the teaching assistants can really help here. Planning can really help.
I'm making sure that the sound, everything is good. Every now and then asking for feedback from the online audience as well. Asking for
Yeah. Are there any things that people have found overcame those challenges, be it the audio or trying to kind of make the students feel at home included? Is there anything that particularly has worked for people beyond what we've mentioned?
In terms of the technical setup, at Aerospace, we had the luxury that was all centrally arranged. And that really helps a lot. So the camera was set up properly. There was someone operating the camera. There were proper mics. So, the audio quality was good. So that is, I think that's a model possibly worth copying if it's not done at other faculties, to just say, hey, we are doing this now, and let's invest in proper equipment to support that. And not make people rely on the bad lighting at home, or like the lighting in my office now is also not so good, or not ideal. The main challenge I've seen is that there are lots of activities which work online, and there are lots of activities which work on campus, but there are not so many activities which work both at the same time. For example, when the class is fully online, I can push a button and divide everyone up into breakout rooms. But when they're in the lecture theater, that doesn't work. Or not in the same way.
That's why planning can be very important. So if you know how many audience you're going to have online, then you would perhaps think of having those people who are attending online in one group, or dividing them into several groups, and then the people who are on campus. And also one thing would be to communicate right at the beginning, how those people, how the online audience can ask questions. Can they just raise their hands? Can they shout out loud? Can they write down in the chat? Yes, Calvin.
Yeah, I was going to say for me, a challenge is always going to be on the technology. And I've really seen that in the last year, where we rely on external parties for their technology, and they can easily make a change, and it just drastically impacts everything. So I commend Bob for actually creating his own sort of thing. I think if universities are really going to seriously invest in hybrid, we need to start creating sets of open source tools that we maintain or have influence ourselves, or can decide when we change versions. Because I can tell you, as a teacher, it was very frustrating. It's just like, oh, there was some update and your whole workflow was completely broken.
Right, yeah.
And that happened with Microsoft Teams, I think 3 or 4 times over the last year.
That happens very often with Teams, yes.
And we were all requiring to use that, and it leads to a lot of frustration. And yeah, you might heavily invest in a tool, and they might decide it gets bought out, or they decide not to invest in it anymore. So I think as a global education community, we need to start kind of creating or supporting open source tooling, or creating tool sets that we have a little bit more control and influence over.
Yeah.
Really.
Another comment from Pim here, saying how to merge it with my current preparations, avoiding double preparation for one lecture that includes online and face-to-face. Pim, would you like to explain about that, like elaborate on it a bit?
Yeah, sure. Hi. So what I've been doing so far, I think John Allen mentioned something similar before, right? But when I have to do an online session, I prepare it for online. I know how that works now. The same for when I teach a physical class. I know how that works. I prepare it for a physical classroom, but I haven't done a hybrid session yet. But But I think what I will do is just do my preparation twice. So prepare the online part and prepare the physical part to make sure that it's evenly accessible, make sure that it's equal. But that's not a sustainable approach, right? If I have to do hybrid, that I have to do twice the preparation. So
Yeah.
it's one of the challenges, and I think a lot has to do with getting used to it. But how much am I going to invest in hybrid if I also want to do the face-to-face and the online as separate things? So that's one of the challenges that I...
Yeah. Thank you, Pim. But perhaps now we have quite a few teachers here who have experience with hybrid and who've prepared for hybrid sessions. Any recommendations, any comments from the experienced teachers here? Does Pim need to prepare twice for a hybrid session?
You will have to prepare differently, but I guess for me, it depends on the scale of your course. If it's a small enough course and you have a small number of people online and a small number of people in the class, that is easier to sort of run and manage. You know, just put up a screen and you can see the people's faces and encourage them to put on the cameras. It's not a problem. With the larger classes, it becomes a lot more difficult to split your mind between the sort of two groups. And what I sort of say with that is, it's actually unfortunate you start using what you did with online teaching and try and use asynchronous communication instead of doing live polling. Perhaps do a little bit more preparation in a pre-lecture poll, and so that you're not always dividing your time and flopping around, trying to focus on the online, trying to focus on this. So it does change the learning experience, but it's completely different depending on the scale of the class.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we do have a few more slides about the planning, which hopefully I think we're coming up very close to the end, but we should have time to maybe cover those right at the end as like a summary. But yeah, absolutely, planning is the key. I think from my own experiences of sort of helping out with this, I think keeping it as simple as possible, thinking about that kind of baseline, what's important, focusing your planning time on the, I guess assuming that there may be kind of, more to do, but kind of trying to keep it simple, limit the kind of amount that you would try and pack into a kind of a lecture, because I think time can be taken away from technical issues which you have to account for and so on. But we'll cover that maybe at the end. Yeah. I also just wanted to pick up on a point, just that Calvin, I think Bob as well, made before about kind of open sourcing educational tooling, building our own things. I know certainly that TU Delft are really active in that community. I know the AV faculty and others have built a lot of things already, which is fantastic. There's also something else as well, which maybe I can catch up with you about afterwards. There are some digital education hackathons, which again TU Delft have hosted in the past, and there are efforts going on. But I think it's a really important discussion to have. I remember last time in my previous job, we actually met with Microsoft and actually tried to get them to open source Teams, but it doesn't look like it's happening at this stage. But yeah, I think it's really important to have these discussions, because I think continuity in teaching is maybe not controlled by a third party. Yeah, it'd be a really interesting discussion to have.
Should we go forward?
Yes, let's go forward. So I think we've covered a lot of this again.
Yeah,
But yeah, so let's skip. But yeah, so flexibility to attend campus online. But yeah, that flexibility can provide inclusivity. I think that's kind of the main sort of thing I wanted to go to mention. So it's not just flexibility for the sake of it, but it's flexibility to accommodate different students' needs. And I think there's work we're doing on inclusivity and diversity, actually with Atafay and I. So looking at what are the actual experiences of students and teachers, and how can we kind of create inclusive environments and setups for people. But yeah, also kind of access to specialist equipment, labs, and so on is another benefit. But obviously, you've got to think about what is the experience of those online. So it might be that you kind of swap over or have different sessions for that kind of thing. I think we've touched again on involving online and participating students. I've got a paper which I'll post at the end as well. But yeah, possibly the technical issues, and it could, as we've said, potentially high workload in planning and things like this. But again, maybe if our planning is kind of focused on the right things, maybe we can try and cut that down to a degree.
Yeah. And I think it's always a good idea to use the support of a TA during the sessions, because as a teacher, you can't focus on both your lecture and the content and the audience available, on campus, as well as, moderating the chat and seeing what's actually happening online.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it is, being realistic about what you can manage, and also, thinking, okay, I do need to focus on the teaching. So, trying to get a TA or even more than one TA who's ideally experienced with hybrid as well, or if not, maybe if they are able to visit the room, check the facilities beforehand. There's lots of different kind of small things you can do to try and highlight any technical issues and maybe deal with them prior to the event, or maybe the TA could do that as well.
Yeah, always it's a good idea to have a test session, or even before the class, starts 10-15 minutes in advance. If you're there, checking the facilities, equipments to see if everything works well, sound quality and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. And if there are if you don't have time for that, again, the TAs can potentially do that for you. And I know there are test sessions going on in the different faculties as well, which maybe again the TA could help out with those. But also there is help. So again, we'll post the email address for this. But if there are technical issues in a room that are recurring, or maybe that need to be fixed for a certain time, do let them know, and they're really keen to kind of get those issues resolved for the benefit of all.
Yeah, and the different faculties also have different equipments for hybrid. There are also rooms that are equipped with, integrated cameras and speakers, letting you have a smoother hybrid experience than the others, where you have to take the cameras, the meetup bars, for example, to class. It's always good to check the availability of those rooms.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, actually, one thing I might actually mention as well, maybe with a quick poll, but not in a traditional sense, maybe just put your hand up. Have you come across the Education Spaces viewer online? Has anyone kind of visited this? I'll just quickly maybe show you a preview of it, if I can get it up in time. So this is, something which is accessible for all. And if I just post the link to that. So you can see all the different kind of buildings, all the different rooms. You can actually filter by hybrid education advanced light on request. So you can actually get a sense of what facilities, what facilities are provided in different rooms by clicking on these, like in the lecture hall or in the different rooms. So you can use this to dig into a little bit more of the details, but I would still kind of urge you to ideally, if you can, kind of either visit the room or get the TA to visit the room as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe we'll just kind of move on. I think we've had enough example activities, but yeah, if there are any other example activities, feel free to post. Should we kind of wrap up with this? If you want to stick around, feel free to do so, to kind of chat about more experiences or share any challenges, but perhaps we'll move on to the kind of practicalities.
Yeah. So practicalities, should I go? Yes.
Go
So as Michael already mentioned, planning is key. Plan what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, communicate with the online audience as well as the present audience, how we're going to, how can they ask questions, how we're going to proceed, how the group works are going to work, like how things are going to happen. And then the room facilities, check it in advance. The link is very helpful, so you know what rooms with what capacity have what facilities, and check them out before the classroom starts, before you start teaching. Use the TA support, contact your blended learning developers, they're going to help you with TAs, and then have a backup plan. Always there's a possibility that things go wrong. Now the question came to my mind, does anyone have any experience with things going wrong for hybrid? Yes.
We had some technical difficulties at various points during the lectures, but because it was the hybrid setup where everything was run by a TA, basically the TA was in charge of fixing that, and we didn't have to worry about it too much.
Yeah, nice. So it's always good to have a backup plan, to know what you're going to do in case this doesn't work and that doesn't work. mostly technical issues.
And that's great to hear that the TA helped to fix that. I think that's really important. The TAs can be really great. I know that the TAs are getting more experienced in hybrid, and as blended learning advisors, I think either most of us, or certainly the education advisors in the different faculties, at least some of us, are dealing with hybrid education. And so, yeah, so do let either us know. I posted a link to all the blended learning advisors' email addresses earlier in the chat. We can help to train the TAs as well. And we can kind of recommend perhaps TAs who have done it before, had experience of it before as well. Calvin, did you have a comment?
Yeah, we had an interesting issue, and this has to do with fragmentation of services within the university, where indeed we set up all these hybrid teaching rooms over the summer. But of course, all the computer equipment and projectors and everything are centrally controlled. And then without anyone knowing in the faculty, 1 week before the start of the term, they came in and updated and changed things and completely broke our systems. So for the first week, we had to scramble around and redesign and troubleshoot all kinds of stuff, which was, but it actually is an interesting point, because you rely on the technology so much that, you know, certain things like the smart board, you know, if your smart board is easy to transmit online, but if you write on a chalkboard, that's great for the students on campus. But if you're not properly set up for that in the room, it's a big disaster.
Absolutely, and that's actually really interesting you mentioned that, because that's something that came up just for me the other day. And yeah, absolutely. So just to kind of return maybe to the education spaces view, I've got up actually one of the lecture halls in the faculty I'm working in. And you'll notice you can actually see whether there is touchpads, smart boards, and so on and so forth. And maybe also just to mention, you can hover over here to find out more information on the info areas. So in this particular room, there is a touchpad, and there are some pictures of it. But again, I would recommend that you visit it and speak to your blended learning advisor as well if you can. But yeah, if you are planning to maybe annotate a screen or maybe point at something which is kind of relevance, maybe have a think about that, because you can do simple things in PowerPoint where you can annotate the screen, and that could be then transmitted to online students as well. So yeah, there's perhaps a bit of thought involved in preparing those things. But again, there are facilities in the rooms that can help you deal with that.
I would also encourage, if you're going to have to do hybrid, you know, it's a small investment, 300-400 euros. You can get a little Wacom tablet monitor, a portable one that you can hook up to your laptop as a backup. That has saved my butt many times when the technology in the room has failed, because I can still stream from my laptop and show that on the screen.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you do a lot of the annotation, I know certainly in the mathematics side of things and others, yeah, that kind of tablet where you kind of annotate, do formulae, is something that's very, very common. So if there is some equipment that you need, or maybe if you'd like us to check if it would work in the room or how you would use it, then do let us know. No problem at all, Kevin. Thanks so much for your input. So Bob has made another comment. So this is, I think, one of the bigger risks or problems with all this. It can easily decrease teachers' independence and agency. Yeah, absolutely. So did you want to say more about that, Bob?
Well, with Calvin's discussion of this is also one of the reasons why I like to have things under control, and I built my own thing. I don't want to rely on the IT people from the faculty or the things that are in the room, unless I can really 99.9% count on them being there and working like I expect them to work. Because I want to have the freedom to also change a little bit what I'm doing as I'm doing it. And the more I have control over the tools that I'm using for my sessions, the more I have that ability and that agency. And I'm seeing an increasing amount of sessions where either my own sessions or colleague sessions, they're interrupted or they don't work as smooth as they could have worked, because suddenly we're dependent on systems and other people, and all sorts of things that we didn't used to be dependent on. So I try to minimize that, and it's one of the reasons why I'm not a fan of hybrid sessions, because it increases that dependency massively.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think maybe the ability to be able, even if you can't attend the room, but maybe if you are able to use your own laptop or something if you have any specialist software, or even if you don't have a tablet and you don't have those kind of things, but you could practice in PowerPoint that you've got the slides and you can annotate and you're kind of familiar with that. I think sometimes familiarity can really help to kind of take away those distractions as well, and the kind of the uncertainty, to give the teachers a bit more agency as well. But again, do contact the blended learning advisors if there's particular equipment you're struggling with or particular kind of things that are causing issues. Atfe, sorry, did you want to say something?
No, I think we're out of time now.
We're out of time, yes.
2 minutes past 11. Thank you all for participating and sharing your experience with us. We hope that you benefited from the session. Feel free to contact us for any questions or further help that we might be able to provide you with.
And just so you know, for next week, we have PIM up, and it is on matching your media format to your education purpose. And that's November 3rd is our next meeting. Thanks for being with us here today.